Have you ever walked away from a conversation feeling like something was stolen from you? Have you ever spent time with someone and then needed hours, maybe even days to recover? This feeling of emptiness isn't a coincidence. It's the result of interacting with deeply unconscious personalities. Eckhart Tolle speaks extensively about ego patterns, about how unconsciousness manifests in behaviors that destroy relationships and suck the vitality out of those around them. And today, I'm going to show you 7 personality types that you should avoid, or at least approach with extreme caution. What you're about to learn could completely transform how you relate to the people around you. It could explain relationships that never made sense. It could give you the tools to protect your inner peace. This isn't about judging people. It's about recognizing patterns of unconsciousness so that you can protect yourself. Because when you're awakening, you become especially vulnerable to these types. Your light attracts their darkness. Your energy becomes food for their hungry ego. Tolle reminds us that unconsciousness isn't anyone's fault. These people are trapped in patterns they didn't consciously choose. But that doesn't mean you should sacrifice yourself for them. Compassion doesn't mean absence of boundaries. In fact, setting boundaries can be the most compassionate thing you can do, both for yourself and for them. The first type is what I call the energy vampire. This person always seems to be in crisis, always needing help, always with a new drama that demands your attention and your energy. In the beginning, you want to help. You're a good person. You care. But after a while, you notice a pattern. The problems never end. The crises never resolve. No matter how much you give, it's never enough. Tolle explains that some people are addicted to their own suffering. Their ego feeds on drama. It needs problems to feel alive. And if there aren't any real problems, it creates them. The energy vampire doesn't want solution. If you offer a solution, they'll find a reason why it won't work. What they want is your energy, your attention, your emotional involvement, and they'll drain everything they can. You recognize the energy vampire by the signs. You feel exhausted after talking to this person. You notice that the conversation is always about their problems, never about you. You feel guilty when you try to set boundaries. You notice that your own problems seem insignificant next to theirs. Tolle would say that the energy vampire is completely identified with their pain body. This pain body is an accumulation of past suffering that feeds on more suffering, and it uses you as a source of nourishment. The solution isn't to completely abandon these people, but it's essential to recognize what's happening and not let yourself be sucked dry. Set clear boundaries about how much time and energy you can offer. Refuse the role of savior. Understand that you can't heal someone who doesn't want to be healed. Tolle offers a profound perspective here. He says that when you assume the role of savior, you're feeding your own ego just as much as the other person's. The ego loves to feel needed, loves to feel superior for helping. And this cycle keeps both of you trapped in unconsciousness. True help, according to Tolle, is being present without identifying with the other person's problem. It's listening without absorbing. It's offering compassion without getting lost in the drama. This is much harder than it seems. It requires a firm anchor in the present moment. If you recognize an energy vampire in your life, ask yourself, am I helping this person? Or am I feeding a vicious cycle? Is my presence making a real difference, or just prolonging the suffering of both of us? The second type is the always right person. This person is never wrong, and never. No matter the evidence, no matter the logic, no matter how many people disagree, they always find a way to be right. Tolle identifies this as one of the deepest ego patterns, the compulsive need to be right. The ego feels threatened by being wrong. To it, being wrong is a form of death, so it will defend its positions to the last consequence. With this type of person, discussions are useless. Logical arguments don't work. Evidence is ignored or distorted. The only way to deal is not to enter the game, not to try to convince them, simply let them be right, and move on. You recognize the always right person by several signs. They turn any conversation into a debate. They never admit fault, even when caught red-handed. They rewrite history to portray themselves as correct. They feel personally attacked when you disagree. The danger of relationships with this type is that you start to doubt yourself. You start to think that maybe you are the one who's wrong. You start to give in to everything just to avoid conflict. And this erodes your self-confidence, little by little. This is one of the most devastating effects. Over time, you lose touch with your own truth. You stop trusting your perceptions. You start to question your sanity. And all because another person desperately needs to maintain an illusion of infallibility. Tolle teaches that the need to be right is inversely proportional to consciousness. The more awake you are, the less you care about being right. The more asleep, the more desperate the fight to be right. A truly conscious person can say easily, "I was wrong." They don't feel this as a threat to their identity, because their identity doesn't depend on their opinions or positions. They know they are not their thoughts. If you're in a relationship with someone who never admits fault, observe how it affects you. Observe if you are losing your voice. Observe if you are shrinking to fit into this person's world. This observation can be the first step to reclaiming your power. The third type is the chronic complainer. This person complains about everything: the weather, the traffic, the government, their partner, their job, life in general. Nothing is ever good enough. Tolle says that complaining is one of the ego's favorite strategies for strengthening itself. Each complaint is a small story that the mind creates, and in which you completely believe. And every time you complain, you feed the ego. The problem with being around a chronic complainer is that negativity is contagious. You start to see the world through their eyes. You start to notice more problems. You start to complain too. The negative energy spreads like a virus. You can easily spot the chronic complainer. No solution is ever good enough. There's always a problem with everything. The glass is always half empty. And even when good things happen, they find the negative side. The most important thing to understand about the chronic complainer is that they're not seeking solutions. They're seeking validation for their negativity. When you agree with their complaints, you give them exactly what their ego wants. Eckhart Tolle suggests a different approach. Instead of agreeing or disagreeing, simply observe. Don't feed the complaint with more energy. Don't try to fix it. Just be present without getting involved in the drama. This can be frustrating for the complainer, but it protects your energy. There's a practice that Tolle recommends. When you're near a chronic complainer, become extremely conscious of your own breathing. Feel your feet on the ground. Anchor yourself in the present moment. This creates a kind of energetic shield that prevents the negativity from penetrating. And observe something interesting. The chronic complainer often gets uncomfortable around people who are very present, because presence doesn't offer what their ego needs. There's no reaction, there's no agreement, there's no fuel for the fire of the complaint. You might even notice that the complainer starts to avoid you, or the complaints diminish when you're around. This isn't magic. It's simply the result of not feeding the pattern. The fourth type is the subtle manipulator. This person never asks directly, never says what they really want. Instead, they manipulate. They use guilt. They use victimhood. They use charm. They use whatever tool works to get what they want. The manipulator is dangerous because you often don't realize what's happening. You think you're making your own decisions, but you're actually being led. When you realize it, you've already done things that you would never have done of your own free will. Tolle teaches that the ego uses any lie to keep its identity intact, and manipulation is a form of lying, a way to distort reality to serve the ego's purposes. You recognize the manipulator by a strange feeling. You do things you don't want to do, and you don't quite know why. You feel guilty without having done anything wrong. You notice that you always give in this relationship. You notice inconsistencies between what the person says and what they do. The manipulator often uses specific tactics. Guilt is a favorite. If you don't do what they want, you're a bad person. Victimhood is another. They're always the victim, never the responsible one. Intermittent charm, too. Moments of extreme affection followed by calculated coldness. The best defense against the manipulator is to trust your intuitions. If something feels wrong, it probably is. If you feel constantly confused or guilty for no reason, question it. And more importantly, learn to say no without giving explanations. The manipulator doesn't deserve your justifications. Tolle speaks about the importance of being present when dealing with manipulators. The manipulator operates through automatic reactions. They count on you being on autopilot, responding to emotional triggers without thinking. When you're present, you create a space between the stimulus and the response. You see the tactic before falling for it. You notice the guilt being placed on you and can choose not to accept it. A powerful phrase to use with manipulators. I need time to think about it. This simple phrase breaks the cycle. The manipulator depends on immediate responses, on decisions made under emotional pressure. When you ask for time, you reclaim your power of choice. The fifth type is the one who always needs to be the center of attention. This person can't stand it when the focus isn't on them. If you're telling a story, they interrupt with a better story. If you're receiving compliments, they divert attention to themselves. Tolle talks about how the ego feels empty and constantly needs external nourishment. For this type, the attention of others is the main food. Without it, the ego feels like it's dying. Relating to this person is exhausting because you never have space. Your experiences, your feelings, your accomplishments are always minimized or ignored. Everything revolves around them. You recognize this type by obvious patterns. They constantly interrupt. They turn any conversation into a monologue about themselves. They seem disinterested when you talk. They compete for attention in any social situation. What this person really has is a huge inner emptiness, and they try to fill this emptiness with external attention. But it's never enough. No matter how much attention they receive, the emptiness remains. Tolle would say that this pattern is one of the most obvious forms of identification with the ego. The ego needs external confirmation to feel real. And when that confirmation doesn't come, it panics. The way to deal with this type is not to enter the competition. Don't fight for attention. Simply give space when appropriate and set boundaries when necessary. And more importantly, don't expect this person to give you genuine attention. They're not capable of it while they're so identified with the ego. Tolle invites us to see this with compassion. Behind the constant need for attention, there's a deep pain, a feeling of emptiness that no amount of external attention can fill. This person is trying to heal an inner wound with external applause, and it never works. If you need to maintain a relationship with this type, the key is not to feel diminished. Your life, your experiences, your feelings have value even when they're not recognized. You don't need this person's validation to be complete. And if you catch yourself competing for attention, observe this with curiosity. Ask yourself, why do I need this person's attention? Does this need come from a place of awareness or insecurity? Often, these relationships reveal our own unhealed wounds. The sixth type is the relentless critic. This person sees flaws in everything and everyone. Nothing you do is good enough. There's always something wrong. There's always something that could have been better. Tolle explains that constant criticism is a way for the ego to feel superior. By pointing out the flaws of others, the ego elevates itself. It may not have its own achievements, but at least it can show the faults of others. Living with a relentless critic destroys your self-esteem little by little. You start to doubt yourself. You start to feel inadequate. You start to believe that you really aren't good enough. You recognize the relentless critic by their constant pattern. They comment negatively on everything. They rarely offer sincere compliments. When they do compliment, it always comes with a but. They seem genuinely incapable of seeing the positive side of things. What's really important to understand is that criticism says so much more about the critic than it does about you. Eckhart Tolle teaches us that when someone is constantly critical, they're projecting their own insecurities. The critic deeply hates themselves and simply transfers that hatred onto others. The way to protect yourself is to not internalize the criticism. Listen, consider if there's anything useful there, and then let it go. Don't let the critic's distorted view become your view of yourself, and if possible, limit the amount of time you spend with that person. There's an exercise that Tolle suggests. When you receive criticism, observe the reaction in your body. Notice the tightness in your chest, the tension in your shoulders, the clenching in your stomach. These are all signs that the ego is defending itself. Instead of reacting, simply breathe. Allow the sensation to be there, without resisting it. Ask yourself, is there anything useful in this criticism that I can learn from? If yes, learn it. If not, let it go. The relentless critic frequently repeats the voices of their own past. Someone, at some point, criticized them in the same way, and now they're passing it on. Seeing this can generate compassion, but compassion doesn't mean accepting abuse. You can have compassion at a distance. The seventh type is the passive-aggressive person. This person never expresses anger directly. Instead, they attack in subtle ways. Sarcastic comments, broken promises, sabotage disguised as forgetfulness. The passive-aggressive person is perhaps the most difficult to identify because on the surface, they seem perfectly reasonable, but underneath, there's a hostility that manifests in indirect ways. You feel that something is wrong, Ray, but you just can't put your finger on it. Tolle talks about how repressed emotions manifest in distorted ways. When someone can't express their anger directly, it comes out sideways, and the target often doesn't even know they're being attacked. You recognize the passive-aggressive person by subtle signs. They say that everything is fine when clearly it isn't. They conveniently forget important things. They make comments that seem like jokes, but have a cruel undertone. They sabotage in ways that can be easily denied. The danger of the passive-aggressive person is that you start to doubt your own perception. They can deny any accusation. They can make you seem paranoid. They can convince you that you're imagining things. The way to deal with it is to name the behavior directly. When you sense the hostility, say it. It seems like you're upset with me. When they deny it, don't argue, simply maintain your perception. And if the pattern continues, seriously consider limiting or ending the relationship. Tolle emphasizes the importance of trusting your energetic perception. You know when you're being attacked, even if the words say otherwise. Your body knows and your intuition knows. Don't let logical arguments convince you that you're imagining things. The passive-aggressive person often hides behind declared good intentions. They say they just want to help, while they sabotage. They claim they care, while making comments that hurt. The discrepancy between words and energy is the clearest sign. If you're in a relationship with a passive-aggressive person, the most important thing is to maintain contact with your own truth. No matter what they say, what you feel is real. Your experience is valid, and you have the right to name it, even when faced with denial. Now, you might be wondering what to do with this information. How do I deal with these types when I encounter them? Tolle offers a perspective. That may seem radical at first. He says that these people are our greatest teachers, not because we should accept their toxic behavior, but because they show us where we still have work to do on ourselves. If the energy vampire affects you deeply, maybe it's because you still have an unconscious need to be needed. If the always right person irritates you intensely, maybe it's because you're also attached to being right. If the critic hurts you, maybe it's because you still seek external validation. This doesn't mean the fault is yours. It means that every difficult relationship carries an opportunity for self-awareness. The first thing is to recognize. Simply knowing that these patterns exist is already a huge protection. Because when you recognize the pattern, you're no longer manipulated by it. You see what's happening, instead of just reacting. The second thing is to not react. Tolle teaches that non-reaction to the egos of others is one of the most effective ways to transcend your own ego. When you don't react, you don't feed the pattern, you don't enter the game. This doesn't mean being passive or permitting abuse. It means responding consciously instead of reacting automatically. It means seeing the behavior as an expression of unconsciousness, not as a personal attack. The third thing is to establish boundaries. You can have compassion for unconscious people without letting them destroy you. Boundaries are essential. If someone is draining your energy, you have the right and the responsibility to protect yourself. The fourth thing is to accept that you can't change anyone. Tolle is clear about this. You can't awaken another person. You can't force them to see their patterns. All you can do is work on yourself and be present. And the fifth thing is to observe these same patterns in yourself. Because the uncomfortable truth is that we all have these patterns to some degree. The energy vampire, the one who needs to be right, the complainer, the manipulator. All of these exist within us too. Recognizing these patterns in others is useful. Recognizing them in yourself is transforming. Because it's when you see your own ego patterns that you can truly transcend them. Tolle teaches that the first step to liberation is awareness. When you observe a pattern, you're no longer completely identified with it. A space opens up, and in that space, choice becomes possible. So use this list, not just to identify toxic people around you, use it also as a mirror. Ask yourself, in what moments do I behave like an energy vampire? When do I desperately need to be right? How much do I complain? How do I manipulate to get what I want? These questions are uncomfortable, but they're exactly the questions that lead to awakening. If you're in relationships with people who exhibit these patterns intensely, you have difficult decisions to make. There's no universal answer. Each situation is unique, but some questions can help. Does this relationship bring me closer or further away from who I really am? Am I growing or withering? Does this person's presence nourish my consciousness or my unconsciousness? The answers to these questions can indicate the path forward. One last reflection that Tolle offers us. The more aware you become, the less affected you are by these patterns. Not because you become cold or indifferent, but because you stop taking things personally. You begin to see other people's egos, the way you see a toddler throwing a tantrum. There's understanding, there's compassion, but there's no need to step into the drama. You can be present for the person without losing yourself in the behavior. And the irony is that this presence, this non-reactivity, is often the greatest gift you can give, because when you don't feed another's ego with your reactions, you create a space where something different can happen. You offer, by your example, another way of being. Eckhart Tolle says that even just one person, fully present in a room, can elevate the consciousness of everyone around them. Your presence is your greatest service, and protecting that presence from toxic influences isn't selfishness, it's wisdom. If you felt the truth of these words, the super thanks button below is your way of supporting this work. It's you saying that consciousness matters, that recognizing patterns is the first step toward freedom, that protecting your energy is as important as expanding it. Every contribution allows us to continue bringing these teachings that transform relationships and lives. The question I leave you with is this: which of these types do you recognize in the people around you? And more importantly, which one do you recognize in yourself? Tell us in the comments. I want to know. Remember, The goal isn't to become paranoid about the people around you. The goal is to develop discernment, knowing when to give energy and when to protect it, knowing when to be available and when to withdraw. This balance is an art that develops with practice and awareness. And if this video helped you see something you didn't see before, share it with someone who needs this clarity, someone who is being drained and doesn't know why. Your sharing can be the light that person needs. The journey of awakening includes learning to navigate relationships consciously, and that means choosing wisely who gets access to your energy, to your time, to your heart, not out of fear, not out of judgment, but out of clarity about what serves your growth and what hinders it.